Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Please consider subscribing and check out our Patreon. Let's have some fun. Story brought to you by Laura Brooks. I can pinpoint the day this all started. It was a chilly Sunday afternoon in early December. A light rain was falling outside, and Carol, my wife, and I had built a cozy fire in the fireplace. She was sitting on one of the couch, her legs curled up beneath her, reading and sipping a glass of wine, and I was sitting at the other, watching the Giants begin to give away a 21-point lead to the Eagles. Carol stood up and stretched, heading toward the kitchen. "Get me a beer, hun," I called after her. "What's the magic word?" she asked with a twinkle. I just wasn't in the mood for this. I'd had a bad week at work. The weather was making me miserable, and the Giants weren't helping. "Just get the beer, all right? I don't feel like playing games." She brought the beer and gave it to me without saying a word. When I opened it, it exploded all over me. "What the big idea?" She giggled to herself. "You really should have asked me more politely. I'm not your maid, I'm your wife." "Yeah, well, right about now, I think I'd rather have a maid. At least a maid wouldn't go shaking up my beer." She turned to me. "You're serious, aren't you?" I didn't replay, but just stared at the tube. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." I dismissed her pique with a wave. "Okay, have it your way. I have a wager for you. Interested?" I was, and turned around to face her. "Go ahead." "What are you suggesting?" "You want a maid so much. Here's your chance. If the Giants win today, next week I'll be your maid for the game. I'll get a cute little maid's outfit, and I'll serve your every need all through the game. And who knows, maybe after. How's that sound?" It sounded great. Carol is a beautiful woman, and the thought of her in a short maid's outfit was something I'd fantasized about many, many times. On the other hand, it sounded a little bit too good to be true. And if they lose? Nothing too drastic. Instead of me reading and you watching the game, we'll rent a long romantic movie and watch it together while we talk like a couple of long-lost girlfriends. Her eyes twinkled. That didn't sound too bad. The Giants were playing the Lions next week, and that didn't exactly come off as the game of the century. "That's it?" I asked. "That's it. You just have to dress the part." "Dress the part?" "Yes, dear. Are you having trouble hearing?" she asked. "My girlfriends don't wear jeans and flannel shirts when visiting." She smiled, a great, big smile. "You want me to wear a dress?" "A dress or a nice skirt or whatever you please, just no pants." I thought about this for a minute. The Giants were leading by 21 late in the third quarter. The upside was having an amazing fantasy come true. The downside seemed a little silly, but how bad could it be? If this was a bad bet, I couldn't see it. "Honey, you got yourself a bet." Carol leaned over and pecked me on the cheek. "That's nice, dear," she smiled. "Let me know how the game comes out." With that, she got up off the couch and headed for the kitchen to begin dinner. I returned to the game and was a little surprised to see that the Giants' lead was down to 14 points during the commercial break between the third and fourth quarters. 2 plays later, it was tied at 28. After the two teams traded unsuccessful drives, the Eagles drove the ball to the Giants' 20, where they scored a field goal with less than 2 minutes left to give them a 31-28 lead. The Giants did nothing in the remaining 90 seconds, giving the Eagles the win. I sat there stunned. Carol won. No maid, no football next week, and I had to wear a dress. When the news came on after the game, Carol poked her head in the living room. "How did the game end, honey?" "The Eagles won." "That's wonderful, honey. We're going to have such fun next week." She was grinning from ear to ear. "You're serious, aren't you?" "Absolutely, dear, absolutely. You would have been if you won." "I guess. Where am I going to get a dress?" Sweetie, I think that's your problem." I could swear she was smirking as she returned to the kitchen. I couldn't imagine how I was going to get a dress and thought about little else for the next couple of days. I finally got up my nerve to go to the shopping mall on Wednesday evening, but when I saw one of the neighbors in the atrium, I got scared and left. When I got home, Carol noticed that I was a little late. "Doing some shopping, dear?" she asked innocently. I said nothing and ate my dinner in silence. A couple of times during the week, Carol mentioned how much she was looking forward to this Sunday and asked what movie I wanted to see. I just grumped about and refused to get pulled in, and I think that made her even happier. It was on Saturday that I finally got up the nerve to get my dress, because by then I thought up a plan. I drove out to the mega discount store a couple of towns over, where no one was likely to recognize me. Once there, I got a shopping cart and picked up some duct tape, some athletic socks, a couple of big bags of potato chips, some windshield washer fluid, and one of those big, ugly, flowery house dresses that zip up the front, the kind my grandmother used to wear all the time. I could play this thing for laughs, couldn't I? I had to push that damn cart around the store a half dozen times before I found them, but I did. I picked out the biggest one I could find after I realized I had no idea about sizes, so I got the biggest they had, which was a 28, and quickly jammed it into the cart. When I got to the checkout, the girl rang up the house dress just like everything else. No bells and alarms went off, and she bagged my purchases, and I drove home. On game day, I got dressed as usual, had breakfast, ran a couple of errands, and generally puttered around the house. Carol did the same thing, but there was a real bounce in her steps where I was dragging. She kept looking at me and smiling, and it was getting on my nerves. About 10 minutes before kickoff, she asked, "Aren't you forgetting something, dear?" I grumbled and shuffled off to the bedroom where I got the house dress out of my closet. I stripped off the jeans and flannel shirt and put this monstrosity on over my t-shirt and boxers, zipped that sucker up, and then put on a pair of white sweat socks. I glanced in the mirror, and from chest level down, I could have been my grandmother. "Ta-da!" I shouted as leapt into the living room. Carol just stared at me. "You're kidding." No, you wanted me in a dress. I'm in a dress." "You missed the whole point," she said quietly. "I wanted a quiet, intimate, warm, lovely romantic day, and you turned this into a joke. A stupid, pointless, idiotic joke." Now it was my turn to stare. "But I thought the clothes thing might be a little fun. It might shake you up a bit and suggest some stuff for later, but I can't believe you did this. You are such a selfish idiot. Take that ridiculous thing off." I did as she asked. I really didn't know what to say to do, so I just stood there while Carol stared at the fireplace. She abruptly got up and stalked off. About 10 minutes later, I heard her start the car and drive off. I got dressed again and turned on the game, but my heart wasn't in it. When she came back an hour later, she glanced at me on the couch, beer in hand, Giants on the tube, snorted, and walked straight upstairs. For the rest of the day, we didn't speak, and sleeping next to her was like sleeping next to an igloo. Our conversation for the next couple of days consisted of, "Pass the salt," "Have you seen the paper?" and "Can't you even pick up after yourself?" accompanied by a pair of dirty socks hurled in my direction. I was in trouble, and the only thing I could think of to get me out of it was to turn the clock back a week. Some things were easy. I picked up some cheese and crackers at the supermarket, a nice Chardonnay, and an expensive champagne at the liquor store, and a bundle of wood at the hardware. Now came the hard part. I thought that getting the dress would be the right place to start, but I came up against that size thing again. I couldn't just walk into a store and grab something because I had no idea what size a thing to grab. I was going to have a sales girl help me, and I just couldn't imagine how I was going to walk into a store and say, "I need a dress. Can you tell me what size?" After thinking about it for a day or so, I decided to tell the truth. I could walk in, look bashful, and tell the truth. Then maybe the salesgirl wouldn't think I was a pervert and might actually help me. What did I have to lose except my self-respect? I traveled to a mall about 20 miles away so that I could be a little surer that no one would recognize me. I thought that it might be easier at one of the big department stores than a smaller store. So I went into the Macy's and headed for the dress department. It was about 7 p.m. on a Thursday night and not very crowded, but I was a little intimidated as I walked through the women behind the cosmetic counters and past the women browsing through the shoes. I was going to have to get shoes too. And the hosiery. I didn't know how I was going to do this, but I knew I had to. When I came to the dress department, walked around it a couple of times, and then walked in timidly, looking utterly clueless. A very pretty, very young blonde came up to me and smiled. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked. It was now or never. I cleared my throat. Yes, I guess so. I looked at her and then looked down. My wife and I had a bet on last week's Giants game and I lost. Now I have to watch this week's game in drag. The salesgirl giggled and blushed, but she wasn't blushing nearly as deep as I was. I don't have a clue about sizes or anything, so I need all the help I can get. I smiled bashfully. "Okay," she said and giggled again. She pawed through a couple of racks and then looked at me and said, "I'm going to have to get my supervisor, sir. I've never fitted a man before. Do you mind?" I blushed and nodded no and tried to make myself as inconspicuous as I could. In a couple of moments, the girl came back with a woman in her mid-40s with a brittle blonde hairdo and a brass nameplate that said Mrs. Kelleher. Mrs. Kelleher smiled at me and simply said, "Yes." I told her about the bet and my predicament. She never stopped smiling. "I'm afraid we can't help you, sir." She emphasized the sir. "You need to go the women's department." I looked confused. "Isn't this the women's department?" "No, sir," she explained, as if talking to a kindergartner. "This is the Mrs. Dress department. The women's department is on the second floor. Or you might try one of the other stores in the mall that caters to larger sizes." She smiled again and walked away. I could hear the girl giggle again from behind a rack of cocktail dresses. I was unbelievably embarrassed at this point. I slinked out of the store, past the cosmetics ladies, and back into the mall. I wandered around the mall a couple of times with my eyes averted until I stopped in front of a store called Laura Brown's, a shop for women. A smaller sign in the entryway said clothes for real women in sizes for real women. I hesitated in the doorway and then walked in, again trying my best to avoid eye contact with everyone. After a minute or two, an attractive woman in trim tan slacks, white blouse, and navy jacket smiled warmly and asked if she could help me. Here we go again, I thought. Yes, I know this sounds ridiculous, but I lost a bet to my wife on last week's game, and I have to watch this week's game with her in drag. I blushed furiously and looked away. "Oh my," she said. "I just stared at her. I swear," her eyes twinkled. "Do you know what size you are, hun?" she asked gently. No, I'll need your help on that." "That's no problem at all. I'm sure I can help. Did you have any idea of what you wanted?" Oh my God, my brain just went completely blank. My expression must have done the same. "Well, don't worry about it. I'm sure we can pull something together." She pulled a tape measure out of her jacket pocket and told me to lift my arms. I glanced around and saw that nobody else was in the store, then lifted my arms. She measured me around the chest, then around my waist, then around my hips. "Okay, that's done. Now, do you have any idea of what you want? A dress, suit, skirt, and blouse, or pantsuit? Color? Style?" Oh my God, I hadn't even thought about that. Here I was in a store full of dresses and skirts and things, and I didn't have any idea. I just thought of a dress in the abstract. Now I had to pick one out. I almost fainted. No, a dress, I guess. Something simple. Actually, hun, I'd recommend against a dress for you, the way that most of them fit, to get something nice that fits you here, she explained as she touched my shoulders. "It would be far too blousy for your here," and she moved her hands down to my waist. "I think you might be better off with a skirt and maybe a nice blouse or sweater. Does that sound okay to you?" I nodded. All right then. And I think you probably would like something comfortable, not too revealing. Am I right?" Again, I nodded. She leaned in to whisper to me. "You know, hun, you ought to relax. Wearing a skirt isn't going to kill you, and if you're going to go through with this, you might as well try and have some fun doing it." For some reason, that really loosened me up. I actually smiled back at her. "I guess. You might be right." "Are you going to shave?" The question took me by surprise, and I reached up to my cheek. "No, dear, your legs. If you're going to shave your legs, you could wear pantyhose, and that gives us more to choose from. If you're not, you'll have to wear tights, and while that's okay, some outfits just won't look right if you're in tights." Again, I blanched. "I hadn't even thought about that," I blurted. "Okay, that's not a problem. We'll assume you'll wear tights so you can make up your mind later." She spun around and walked over to the other side of the store. looking around her as she went. I followed slowly, watching her every move. When she turned around again to face me, she held up an outfit and asked brightly, "Well, what do you think?" The skirt was long and looked soft. It was mostly a dark brown with a border near the hem that was sort of a paisley with swirls of gold, maroon, and dark green. Above it, she held a light tan mock turtleneck sweater. "That looks great," I said, relieved that this process was coming close to an end. I reached for my wallet and headed towards the cash register. "I think you're going to have to try it on." I just stared at her. "I can only guess at your size, you know. We're not going to know if they fit until you try them." She held them out towards me and nodded to the dressing room. "Give me a shout if you need anything. I'm Catherine." The dressing room was just a few feet away, but it wasn't until I closed the door that I noticed the door not only didn't go to the ceiling, it didn't go to the floor. I wondered if anyone was going to notice my heavy socks and hairy legs under the door. I took off my shoes, jeans, and shirt and let them drop on the floor. I stepped into the skirt, but it wouldn't slide up past my butt. Then I noticed a zipper, and after undoing it, I had no problems. I pulled on the sweater, and everything seemed okay. I looked like hell in the mirror, but what did I expect? "How are you doing in there, hun?" I heard Catherine ask. Okay, I guess it'll work." "Come out and let me see," she replied. "That's okay, I'm all right. Don't be silly." She opened the door to the dressing room and looked at me critically. I was absolutely mortified, standing there in a skirt with the door wide open for anyone to see, and by now there were about a half-dozen customers scattered about the store in addition to another couple of saleswomen. "Well, the first thing is that we ladies usually wear our zippers in the back." With that, she grabbed the waist of my skirt and yanked it around until the zipper was indeed in the back. That a couple of her yanks included my boxer shorts, thus inducing a shocking rearrangement of things I thought was better left unsaid. "That's much better," she said. "Although I think this skirt is a bit big. It might look better one size smaller. What do you think?" She didn't wait for me to answer, but left to go to the rack for another skirt, leaving the door open. I closed it as quickly as I could, but she was back in an instant to open it back up again. "Here, try this one. Remember, zipper in the back." I closed the door, unzipped and dropped my skirt to the ground and put the new one on. Zipping up the back was a bit of a contortion, but I managed. "All set?" Catherine asked. She opened the door just as I was finished pulling up the zipper. "Yes, that's much better." Then she spun me around and unzipped my skirt. "I think that this would look nicer if you tucked in the sweater," she explained as she smoothed the bottom of the sweater down around my boxers before zipping me up again. "Turn around!" I did as ordered. Wait right here." I wondered where she expected me to go, dressed like that. She came back with a belt and a scarf. The belt was wide with a big brass buckle, and the scarf was dark brown with a pattern that was similar to the one on my skirt. She wrapped the belt around me and fastened it in front, then spun the scarf a couple of times around itself and draped it around my neck and over my left shoulder. "There, you're perfect." I turned around to look at the mirror in the dressing room, and I have to admit it wasn't all that bad. The sweater and skirt felt soft next to my body, and I liked the way everything sort of flowed gently, at least from the calves to the neck. The legs and head certainly gave the lie to the prettiness of the ensemble, and if you looked closely, you'd notice that the sweater hung in a straight cylinder when it would have preferred nice breasts and a waist. I shook myself out of my reverie in time to see Catherine grinning at me. "See, now that isn't so bad, is it?" I smiled shyly back at her. "I guess these will do." "Not yet," she said. "You'll need some tights, shoes, and underwear. Maybe some jewelry if you want to do this right. I'll get your tights while you get dressed." She began to walk away but turned around. "Unless you want to wear those home?" Again, she smiled broadly as she walked to the hosiery racks. I just scuttled back into the dressing room to get back into my clothes. When I brought everything to the counter, Catherine gave me a slim box. "Here are your tights, hun. They're chocolate brown, so they will complement your skirt perfectly." "Thanks," I mumbled. "I'd love to see you when you get everything together. I think you'd be a doll," she said as she rang up the sale. The bill came to more than I expected. This wasn't going to be cheap. And I gave her my credit card. As she was processing the credit card, she said, "There's a store about 5 doors down called Under It All, where you can pick up your underwear. I don't think the department stores will have what you need in your size, and there's about a half dozen shoe stores, and I'm sure you'll find something nice at one of them." She bagged up my outfit. "Here's a credit card application in case you want to open up an account and a 15% off coupon for your next purchase." My next purchase? Thanks. You've been very helpful. Why, thank you. Now you have a nice day, and hun, relax. You're not the first man I've seen in here, and you won't be the last. She smiled very graciously at me, and I left, not knowing if I was supposed to be relieved or embarrassed. Thanks for watching. Check out Patreon if you want to have early access to the other parts. If not, it will be online in a couple of days.